The most dangerous man in the world is not the one with a weapon, but the one who cannot admit that he is wrong. He will watch his marriage crumble, he will watch his children grow distant, and he will watch his home turn into a cold museum of silence, all just to protect a version of himself that doesn't even exist. This is the tyranny of the ego. For the modern man, the ego is often mistaken for dignity. We are taught from a young age that to lead is to be untouchable, that to be a father means having the final word every single time. But there is a heavy price for being the man who is never wrong. When you prioritize your pride over the hearts of those you love, you aren't leading. You are simply ruling over a kingdom of ghosts. Think about the last time you felt that heat rising in your chest, while during a simple conversation with your wife. That urge to interrupt, that need to defend your position, that cold instinct to shut down and withdraw your affection. That wasn't your strength speaking. That was your ego, fearing that if you lower your shield, you might lose your power. But here is the unspoken truth of the home. Power that requires a shield is fragile. True authority, the kind that commands respect without a word, comes from a place of radical humility. It comes from the man who is secure enough in his worth to say, I miss the mark, or I don't have all the answers. In this video, we are going to look into the mirror. We are going to identify the specific ways your ego is sabotaging your leadership. We are going to learn how to kill the version of yourself that is standing in the way of the man your family actually needs. It is time to stop defending the wall and start building the bridge. The ego does not always arrive with a roar. In the sanctuary of your home, it often arrives as a whisper disguised as logic or common sense. To master the ego, you must first be able to name it when it shows up at your dinner table or in your bedroom. The first mask of the ego is the need to be right. Have you ever found yourself arguing over something trivial, like the way a dish was washed or a direction on a map? You feel the tension building, and even when you realize that the topic doesn't matter, you cannot stop. You keep pushing, you keep explaining, until your wife or child simply gives up and walks away. That isn't a victory. That is your ego demanding a sacrifice of peace to feed its hunger for validation. The second mask is the need for control. As the pillar of the home, where you feel the weight of responsibility. But the ego twists this responsibility into a demand for total compliance. When your children don't follow your path, or your spouse has a different vision, the ego feels threatened. It interprets a difference of opinion as a direct challenge to your authority. You react with anger, or worse, with the third mask, the silent withdrawal. This is perhaps the most destructive tool in the ego's arsenal. When you don't get your way, or when your feelings are hurt, you shut down. You use your silence as a weapon of punishment. You withhold your presence, your affection, and your warmth, hoping that the coldness will force the other person to bend. In your mind, you think you are being stoic. You think you are keeping the peace. But in reality, you are just hiding. Behind a wall of pride, the ego thrives in this isolation. It tells you that no one understands you. It tells you that you are doing everything while everyone else is just taking from you. It creates a narrative where you are the hero and everyone else is a problem to be solved. But look closely at the cost. When you operate from the ego, you stop being a partner. You stop being a father who guides, and you become a judge who condemns. Your home should be a place of psychological safety, a place where people can make mistakes and feel loved regardless. But the ego turns that safety into a courtroom. Every conversation becomes a trial, and every disagreement becomes a verdict. Ask yourself honestly, does your family feel like they can come to you with their failures? Or do they hide their hearts because they fear the weight of your ego? Understanding these patterns is the first step toward true leadership, because you cannot heal what you refuse to see. We often dress the ego in the fine clothes of dignity. We tell ourselves that we are standing our ground because a man must have respect. We believe that if we bend, if we admit we were wrong, or if we allow someone else to lead for a moment, that we are losing our value. But this is the great illusion. Dignity is a quiet, unshakable mountain. The ego is a fragile glass house. Dignity does not need to shout to be heard. It does not need to diminish others to feel tall. When you find yourself refusing to apologize, even when you know deep down that your words were harsh, you aren't protecting your dignity. You are protecting your insecurity. The ego is terrified of being small. It views every compromise as a surrender. It views every apology as a sign of weakness. So, it builds a false image of a man who is perfect, a man who is always in control, and a man who never stumbles. But your family doesn't need a statue. They don't need a perfect, unreachable icon. They need a human being. They need a man whose strength is found in his ability to be vulnerable. Think about the message you send to your children when you refuse to acknowledge a mistake. You are teaching them that power is more important than truth. You are teaching them that being right is more valuable than being kind. You're passing down the very chains of the ego that may one day strangle their own future relationships. True dignity, the kind that lasts for generations, is built on the foundation of integrity. And integrity requires the death of the ego. It requires you to look at your spouse and say, I was selfish in how I spoke to you. It requires you to look at your son and say, I reacted in anger and I am sorry. In those moments, you don't become smaller in their eyes. You become a giant. You become a leader, worth following, because you have conquered the most difficult enemy of all, yourself. The ego wants you to believe that your worth is tied to your performance and your perceived perfection. It wants you to keep the mask on at all costs. But the mask is heavy. It is exhausting to always be the one who has to have the answer. It is lonely to always be the one who cannot be questioned. Break the illusion. Realize that your family's love is not a reward for your perfection. It is a gift that can only be fully received when you are honest enough to be real. The weight of the pillar is much easier to carry when you aren't also carrying the crushing weight of a false image. Let the ego die so that the father and the husband can finally live. There is a hollow victory that many men achieve every single day. It is the victory of winning an argument while losing the heart of the person across from them. The ego convinces you that being right is a necessity. It tells you that if you concede a point, you are surrendering your status. So, you use your intellect, your volume, and your logic to crush the opposition. You find the flaws in her reasoning. You point out the gaps in his memory. You build a case so airtight and so cold that the other person simply stops talking. You think you have won, but look at the room. The air is heavy. The connection is severed. Your wife has retreated into a shell of resentment. Your child has learned that their perspective does not matter in your presence. This is the hidden tax of the ego. In the price of being always right is a slow, painful bankruptcy of intimacy. When you prioritize being right, you are sending a message. My opinion is more valuable than our relationship. My pride is more important than your feelings. Over time, this creates a culture of silence. People stop coming to you, not because you are always right, but because it is too exhausting to ever be wrong around you. They stop sharing their dreams because you might criticize them. They stop sharing their struggles because you might judge them. The ego builds a throne, but it is a throne in an empty hall. A leader who cannot be questioned is a leader who cannot be helped. And a man who cannot be helped is a man destined to fail. Consider the energy it takes to maintain this streak of never being wrong, and it requires constant vigilance. It requires you to lie to yourself about your own flaws. It turns every conversation into a tactical maneuver instead of a moment of shared life. You are no longer a husband, you are a defense attorney. You are no longer a father, you are a Supreme Court justice. But your family didn't sign up for a legal battle. They signed up for a home. They signed up for a man who is big enough to admit that his logic might be flawed. A man who is strong enough to say, I see your point, even if he doesn't fully agree. I understand why you are hurt, even if he didn't intend to cause pain. Winning the argument is a short-term hit of dopamine for your ego. Building the relationship is a long-term investment in your legacy. One leaves you with a temporary sense of power. The other leaves you with a lifetime of loyalty. You must decide which currency you want to trade in. Do you want to be the smartest man in the house who sleeps alone in his pride? Or do you want to be the man who is humble enough to listen and wise enough to love? The wall of being right is the very thing keeping the warmth out. It is time to stop winning and start connecting. It is time to realize that in a healthy home, there is no such thing as a one-sided victory. If your partner loses, you lose too. The loudest statement a man can make is often the one he makes without saying a single word. When the ego is wounded and it cannot find the words to win, it retreats into the cold, dark cave of silence. This is the silent treatment. It is a passive-aggressive tool designed to punish, to manipulate, and to force the other person into a state of anxiety and submission. You think you are being controlled. You think you are taking the high road by avoiding a fight. But the reality is much darker. Silence used as a weapon is one of the most destructive forms of emotional labor you can impose on your family. When you withdraw your presence while still standing in the same room, you are creating a ghost in the house. Your wife walks on eggshells, wondering when the freeze will thaw. Your children watch your face, searching for a sign of warmth that isn't there. The ego loves this power. It loves knowing that your silence has the ability to dictate the mood of the entire household. It feels like strength to be the one who decides when the conversation begins and when it ends. But this is not the behavior of a leader. This is the behavior of a man who is terrified of his own vulnerability. You use silence because if you spoke, you might have to admit you are hurt. If you spoke, you might have to hear a truth about yourself that you aren't ready to face. The ego tells you that they deserve the coldness. It tells you that until they apologize, until they acknowledge your dignity, they do not deserve your voice. But every hour of that silence is a brick in the wall. We discussed in the beginning. It erodes trust, and it kills the desire for intimacy. It teaches your partner that it is safer to keep secrets than to risk a disagreement that leads to the big freeze. Stoicism is about emotional regulation, not emotional suppression. A true pillar of the home does not leave the room emotionally. He stays present even when it is uncomfortable. He has the courage to say, "I am very upset right now, and I need 20 minutes to cool down before we keep talking. I am feeling defensive, and I don't want to say something that I will regret later." That is mastery. That is taking control of your ego instead of letting your ego take control of the home. The silence of a strong man should be a place of peace, a place of safety and reflection. It should never be a prison cell for his family. Ask yourself, is your silence a gift of calm, or is it a sentence of isolation? The man who leads with love knows that communication is the lifeblood of the home. To cut off that flow is to slowly kill the thing you are sworn to protect. It is time to find your voice again. Not the voice of the ego that wants to lash out, but the voice of the man who values his family more than his pride. Break the freeze, speak the truth, and remember that a bridge is only built when someone is willing to start the conversation. There is a fundamental difference between having power and having influence. The ego craves power. It wants the title, the final say, and the visible signs that everyone is falling in line. Power is forced. It relies on fear, on position, and on the ability to dominate the space around you. But influence is earned. Influence is the quiet authority that makes people want to follow you, even when you aren't looking. In the context of the home, the ego-driven man thinks that his leadership is measured by how well he can control his wife and children. He treats his family like a project to be managed or a team to be coached, forgetting that they are human beings with their own souls and desires. When you lead from a place of ego, your power is actually very fragile. It only lasts as long as you are the strongest person in the room. The moment your children grow up or your spouse gains her own independence, that power evaporates, and you are left with a house full of people who may obey you but do not respect you. True leadership is about shifting from power to influence. It is about realizing that the most effective way to lead your home is to become the man that they want to please. Not because they fear your anger, but because they value your wisdom. Not because you demand the throne, but because you have proven that you are a servant leader. The ego tells you that serving is beneath you. It tells you that a real man is the one who is served. But the unspoken home thrives on the opposite truth. The man with the most influence is the one who listens the most. the one who notices in the small needs of his wife,
Okay, just a
the
little bit
one
right
who
there.
takes the
Hold it
time
steady.
to understand the fears of his son
Perfect.
without
Now
judging
grab the
them.
clamp.
When you lay down your ego, you stop trying to be the boss, and you start being the foundation. The boss needs people to look up at him. A foundation is content to let people stand upon it. Think about the atmosphere you want to create. Do you want your family to feel like they are constantly under inspection? Or do you want them to feel empowered because your presence gives them the strength to grow? The ego is obsessed with I. Leadership is obsessed with we. The ego asks, how does this make me look? Influence asks, how does this help them thrive? The shift from power to influence requires a radical death to your own self-importance. It requires you to find your confidence in your character rather than your control. Stop demanding respect. Start being respectable. Stop demanding obedience. Start inspiring loyalty. When the ego dies, your true influence begins. And that influence is the only thing that will keep your family together when the storms of life come knocking at your door. Humility is often misunderstood as a form of weakness or a lack of conviction. But for the man who leads a home, humility is the ultimate expression of inner strength. It is the ability to keep your ego in check when the flames of conflict begin to rise. In the heat of a disagreement, the ego is like dry timber, waiting for a single spark to start a forest fire. It wants to defend, it wants to counterattack, and it wants to ensure that you are the last person standing. Practicing humility means being the man who chooses to starve the fire instead of feeding it. It begins with a conscious pause. When you feel that sharp, sarcastic comment pressing against your teeth, you must have the discipline to stop. In that moment of silence, remind yourself of a fundamental truth. The person you are arguing with is not your adversary. She is your partner. He is your child. They are the very people you have dedicated your life to cherish and protect. The ego wants to win the moment, but humility wants to save the connection. A humble leader is willing to be the first to lower his voice. He understands that volume is often a substitute for logic, and that anger is just a mask for fear. Instead of making accusations, he asks honest questions. Instead of saying, "You always make things difficult," he says, "I can see that you are frustrated. Help me understand what I'm missing." This isn't about being a doormat or letting people walk over you. It is about being the emotional anchor of the household. It takes far more masculine power to absorb an emotional blow and respond with steady, calm grace than it does to lash out. By practicing humility, you are creating a safe harbor. You are showing your family that your love for them is bigger than your need to be perceived as perfect. You are teaching your children how to handle their own future conflicts, not through dominance, but through empathy. Think about the atmosphere after an ego-driven fight. It is cold, tense, and filled with lingering resentment. Now, think about the atmosphere after a moment of humility. There is a sense of relief. There is an opening for true healing to begin. A humble man can look past the harsh words to see the pain underneath. He knows that his wife's anger might be a cry for support. He knows that his son's rebellion might be a search for boundaries. When you lay down your ego, you gain the clarity to see these things for what they are. May you stop fighting the person and you start fighting the problem.
I'm ready now.
This is the path of the warrior monk, strong in his values, yet gentle in his approach, unshakable in his commitment, yet flexible in his ego. Dismantle the fortress, brick by brick. Replace the walls of pride with the bridges of understanding. Because at the end of the day, no one remembers who won the argument. They only remember how you made them feel when the world felt like it was falling apart. The most powerful words a man can speak in his home are not "I am the boss" or "listen to me." The most powerful words, the ones that can heal a fractured soul and rebuild a crumbling foundation, are simply, "I was wrong and I am sorry." To the ego, an apology feels like an execution. It feels like you are handing over your sword and admitting defeat. But in the realm of true leadership, an apology is not a surrender. It is a declaration of integrity. It is the moment you prove that your commitment to the truth is higher than your commitment to your own image. Many men avoid apologizing because they fear losing respect. They believe that if they admit a flaw, their wife will look at them differently, or their children will lose faith in them. But the opposite is true. Nothing kills respect faster than a man who is clearly in the wrong, yet refuses to acknowledge it. Your family already knows when you have messed up. They felt the sting of your harsh tone. They saw the unfairness in your decision. They experienced the coldness of your ego. When you refuse to apologize, you aren't fooling anyone. You are simply showing them that your pride is more important to you than their pain. A leader's apology must be clean. It must be without excuses. The ego loves to add a "but" at the end. "I'm sorry I yelled, but you were being very difficult." That is not an apology. That is a veiled accusation. A true apology takes full ownership. "I'm sorry I yelled. I lost my temper, and you didn't deserve that. I will do better." When you speak those words, something miraculous happens in the atmosphere of the home, and the tension breaks. The walls of defense that your partner has built begin to come down. By owning your mistake, you give them permission to own theirs. You create a culture of accountability instead of a culture of blame. Think of an apology as a repair kit for the soul. Every time you act out of ego, you create a small tear in the fabric of your relationship. If you leave those tears alone, the fabric eventually falls apart. An apology is the thread that sews it back together, making the bond often stronger than it was before. It takes a massive amount of courage to look into the eyes of the people who look up to you and admit your humanity. But that courage is exactly what makes you a pillar. A pillar that can admit it tilted is a pillar that can be trusted to stand straight again. Do not let your ego rob you of the chance to set things right. Do not let years of resentment build over a few moments of pride. Go to her. Go to them. Lower your shield and let your strength be found, not in your perfection, but in your honesty. The home is not a place for perfect men. It is a place for men who are brave enough to be whole. The journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, but the journey of a true leader begins with a single death, the death of the ego. We have spent this time looking into the dark corners of our own pride. We have identified the masks, the walls, and the silent weapons that we use to protect ourselves at the expense of those we love. But remember, the goal was never to leave you feeling empty or defeated. The goal was to clear the ground so that something stronger and more beautiful could grow. When you master your ego, you aren't losing yourself. You are finding the man you were always meant to be. You are finding the husband who can lead with a soft heart and the father who can guide with a steady hand. This is the long-term personal growth that defines the mission of the Unspoken home. It is about taking responsibility, not just for the bills you pay or the roof over their heads, but for the emotional climate of your household. You are the pillar, but a pillar is only as strong as its foundation. If your foundation is pride, you will eventually crack under the pressure of real life. If your foundation is humility, you will be unshakable. The weight of being the pillar is heavy, but it becomes a light burden when you stop carrying the extra weight of a false image. As we close this chapter, I want you to look around your home today. Look at the faces of your family. They don't need a king. They don't need an untouchable hero. They need a man who is present, who is real, and who is brave enough to put their hearts above his own vanity. This is the ultimate discipline, the discipline of silence. When the ego wants to scream, the discipline of an apology when the ego wants to hide, the discipline of love when the ego wants to rule. Call to action, CTA. If this message resonated with you, if you felt that familiar heat of the ego as you listen to these words, then you are already on the path to change. Awareness is the first victory, but awareness without action is just another form of pride. I challenge you today to do one thing that kills your ego. Apologize for a harsh word spoken yesterday. Listen to a perspective that you would normally dismiss. Choose a connection over a correction. If you are committed to becoming the leader your family deserves, subscribe to the Unspoken home. Join this brotherhood of men who are learning that true strength is found in responsibility and family leadership. Leave a comment below with the word humility if you are ready to lay down your shield and start building your bridge. Thank you for being here. Thank you for doing the work. Now, go home and lead with your heart.